I'm Howard Halderman. Welcome this morning on behalf of Halderman and Farm Credit Services. Glad that you are joining us today, and look forward to a good discussion. Jim Minturn will be talking about the ag barometer here in a minute down from Purdue. And Jim was just telling me the Top Farmer Workshop. Anybody participate in that? Anybody participate? Mark did? Yeah, I think I got to speak on one of the panels, and there were over 200 people registered. And I think Jim said they had 33 states and somebody from New Zealand that watched the Top Farmer Workshop. So I think the big thing you guys got to decide is, you continue to offer it with that hybrid option, or I guess this time with all, and how you do that in the future. But anyway, we're going to talk about land values here in a second. I want to introduce the Halderman staff. We got Nolan Sampson, our business development director, Gary Volander out of Montgomery County, Todd Litton over down in the Bloomington area, but works up into Putnam County. Gary and Todd will be your local reps. If you got questions about specifics of land values and rents here in this area, they would be the two to talk to. And Nolan just helps coordinate these kind of activities. So we had Tuesday night, we were up in Lafayette, and then Monday night in Fort Wayne. So doing a few of these around the state. But the land value or the farmland market has been pretty dynamic and just interesting. I think Benton County, Steve, did you tell me brought 15? Last night, that was a Schrader sale. We had 19,000 in Hamilton County on Tuesday, and then or Wednesday, and then I think yesterday we were right at 10 in Carroll County. So pretty interesting sales results. But Halderman Company's been around since 1930. My grandfather started the business. He's the guy in the middle, and we represent landowners. So whether you farm, or whether you're an absentee landowner, or you are somebody who maybe banks the landowners, we represent all those sorts of folks. And you can see we do farm management, sales, and appraisals. And so if you need to know what the value of your farm is, we can help you with that. If you want to know about how to rent a farm, we can help with that as well. And the average tenure of our staff is greater than 20 years. And I think this points it out really well. Todd, you started with Halderman in 1985. And Nolan started about 2 years ago. And that's kind of how we get the average of 20. The other night in Lafayette, we had Hugh Pence there. Hugh started in 1956 with Halderman. My grandfather hired him. I never met my grandfather. So you talk about a span of years. And in the room, we had Josh Wagenbach, who just started with us 3 weeks ago. He graduated from Purdue in December. So that's how you get that average of 20. But the point would be, we have a lot of experience. So we're going to talk about farmland and the values that are strengthening today. And it's a great time to be a farmland owner. It's a good time to be a farmland seller. But if you're a buyer, it's kind of tough. No different than if you're trying to buy in the residential market in Indianapolis or any kind of really. So one of the things we've talked about over a number of years is this outside driver of farmland sales. And what do I mean by that? But that would be a tax law change or potential change, maybe a farm bill change, maybe some major economic swing in farmland. Think back to the 1980s. And there's a couple of us in this room that were in the business at that time, maybe Steve. But the 1980s, there was a huge economic downturn due to a whole host of events, very high interest rates, and a lot of farms came on the market due to, unfortunately, repossessed activities that had to happen. So that was an outside driver that forced a lot of land on the market. In 2012, we had a lot of farms come onto the market late in the year because of the fear of capital gains tax increases. Didn't ever happen, but it was this fear caused a lot of folks to say, I want to sell and close this year so that we can capture the capital gains tax rate at the lower levels if possible. We had that same dynamic a little bit this past fall. Now, the interesting thing is we've got 30-some sales this first quarter, which would be up from the last couple of years. So that capital gains tax fear, while there was a few of our sellers last fall said, we want to sell and close and get it done this year, so we're under that current capital gains tax treatment. And I think that whole fear was born from the BBB, the Build Back Better bill that Biden has talked about. Hasn't passed, but in that had a number of tax changes to fund it. And one of those could potentially be a change in the capital gains tax rate. So that's kind of an outside driver. And for the first time since 2012, we saw some sales get motivated by something that would be outside the normal economic or family changes that you see in agriculture today. Number of sales did improve this fall and winter. Really started in October. We had a lot of sales in November, early December, kind of quiet through the holidays like normal. And then we've seen quite a few come to the market here this first quarter. The interesting thing will be the remainder of this year and what kind of supply. I don't think we'll get into an oversupply problem. There is certainly not going to be a foreclosure or a distressed situation arise. So it'll really be a matter of, do people say we're at the all-time high, I want to sell now? That'll be what'll be interesting to see. Cropland values have been stable for the last 5 years until the last 12 months. And then they've jumped up quite a bit. That 18% is a Chicago Federal Reserve number. And that is a survey of ag bankers that they did. And that was from October to October. And I'm going to show you some statistics here in a second that would show that might be low and low quite a bit. Recreational timber and rural residential values are higher. So when you go out into the countryside here in Indiana, you're going to see a lot of timberland, you're going to see rural residences, you're going to see pasture land, creek bottoms, those sorts of things. All of those kind of parts of the rural landscape went up in value. And COVID was a major influence. People can work from home. As long as there was broadband, they had options. And so as a result, people made the choice. Maybe I don't want to live in a highly densely populated city like Indianapolis, and I want to be more in a rural setting in Putnam County, Greencastle area. And so we saw actually a demographic shift. The demographics had been a lot of people moving to the larger metropolitan areas, and that actually slowed down. I don't know that it changed, but it really did slow down, and rural values went up for these other types of real estate. So here's that Chicago Fed survey. It's interesting here. Iowa, the survey said it was up 27%. That's probably more representative of what we've actually seen. Indiana, the survey results were probably about 15%. And again, that's October to October. So the sales I'm going to show you here in a second are all the way through the 1st of January. But the 7th district was up 18%. And that's a pretty strong move in any asset market, and farmland especially. We haven't had too many of those years like that. Here's the Purdue Survey. Now, this is June. So you think about when they do this survey, it's all the way back in June before the 1st of July. We're going to talk about that being a big time change for us anyway in the farmland market. But through June, you saw a move back up to the all-time high values. I think on the best land in the state, 97.50 was the high 5 or 6 years ago, 2013, and we're back at that level according to this survey. These are not actual sales results. These are opinions. Both the Federal Reserve Bank and this survey are just opinions of people that are in the business like us and what they think farmland values are doing. The three different levels there: average, high quality, average, and low productivity. So one of the ways we do actually look at sales results is this Wapi analysis. That's the acronym that we use, but it's weighted average productivity index. So you can take your fields, you can go online using a software tool, online surety is what we use, but you can map that field and it will show you the average productivity index for the soils that exist on your farm. And you basically will come up with a number that could be 135.6, it could be 153, it could be as high as 180. That's kind of the highest rated soil in the state when you get to 180, 185. And the low could be below 100. Below 100 is going to be beach sand, something that is a muck, compromised from the water situation, something like that. So a lot of the farms we sell are in that 135 to 160 range. That would be the average in the state. But we take that Wapi, we take the sale price and divide it by the productivity index for your field. And we arrive at so many dollars per corn bushel of productivity index. And the reason I should explain that is this goes back to 2013. These are all individual sales. Each of these points is an individual sale. And so every farm is different and unique. And so you get a lot of volatility farm to farm. But the trend line is really what we focus on. And back here in 2013, previous all-time high, we were somewhere in the low $60 per bushel, corn bushel of productivity. So if you had a farm and you measured your field and it was 80 acres and had a 153 Wapi, you took that times 62, that would be indicative of what the value would have been back at that time. So then we go into 2014 and we start the year above 60, we end in the mid 50s. So if you recall back to 2014, commodity prices started to erode, farm income started to erode, and naturally, so did farmland values. 2015, and this is always interesting to me, just a emotion probably as much as anything. In 2015, we started back above $60. And I think a lot of times in agriculture, we kind of have that mindset when the calendar changes to the new year, our focus changes to the new crop. Not that you haven't been planning for it, but you start to think about that new crop. It's going to be a good year and optimism reigns. And we kind of see that in this chart where we start back above $60 in early 2015, but then really erode down to 50 by the end of the year when the reality of lower commodity prices and lower farm income set in. So that's the big decline. We were at the all-time peak. We saw that 15 to 20% decline, and we ended up at about $50. And then we stayed there for 5 years. So again, a lot of noise in the chart, but that trend line was right at $49 in 2016. In 2017, 48 to 52. 2018, 49 all the way across. 2019, 45 to 53. So again, a very flat line, right about $50 per bushel of productivity index. And then you get into COVID. We start the year right where we ended 2019, and that right around 50. We end toward the upper ends of the 50s. But the impact of COVID was really a lack of sales. So these are all different sale points, and the more sales volume we have, the more elongated each quarter gets on the bottom of the chart. So you see this narrow gap in Q2. Well, COVID broke in mid-March of 2020. And what happened? We had 10 auctions in April. We converted them all to online only because we had to. Couldn't do events like this. And Steve and I were just talking. We did an event with Farm Credit in Columbus like this. And that was March, 10th or something like that. It was right before the shutdown. So the impact of COVID was not a negative price impact. It was just that the market went to stop. We sold those farms in April and then did nothing in May, June, and July. So it was just a quiet time, which is not all bad, really, and as opposed to what the stock market did. But we end the year on kind of a strong note. Why was that? Well, derecho happened out in Iowa in August. And then we started to see commodity prices creep up. We had the phase one trade deal with China. And so we started to get a little higher corn and soybean prices in the fall of 2020. And land values started to appreciate like all other assets did. Housing market started to strengthen then as well. So we get into 2021. Now you'd say, well, did we go back and start where we were? We did. When we start the year in 21 in the mid 50s, but look at where we ended. This average is above $80. So remember back to 2013, it was 62. That was the all-time high. These are actual sales results. These aren't opinions. These are what we've actually done. And the jump really occurred about July 1st. So start at Q3, which would be July 1st, that's right here. If you ran that trend line for the first 6 months, it would have been flat at about 55. And all of a sudden, go through July, not a lot of sales, and we had 5 auctions in 7 days in August. Late August, early September. And we went through those, and one of them was kind of a recreational piece, but the other 4, they were all over $10,000 an acre. And I said to Pat Karst, our vice president of real estate, I said, something has changed. We've never had back-to-back auctions over $10,000 an acre. And they were in multiple counties and states. It wasn't like they were all in one location. So,
hey, Howard, maybe I missed it, but in all your data there, is that mostly tillable farms? Or...
Great point, Steve. That is all cropland sales. So for those Wapi scores, we take out the sales of recreational land, rural residences. Yeah, we skim those out because that's would skew the data. So great point. Those are just cropland sales.
Over like 85% tillable, 80% tillable.
Yeah. So it really gives you a good picture of what cropland is doing. And so here's this document. Annual average in 21 was $71. So the previous high was 62. The interesting thing is the first 6 months were 55. So that flat 10% up kind of made sense to me, why we would see a 10% increase with better farm income. You had a lot of government money. We'll talk about that in a second. The last 6 months were at $79. That jump that I talked about it was up 46%. So when that Chicago Fed survey says up 18%, I said, okay, that's probably a little light. And we had some buyers. So like I said earlier, it's a great time to be a seller, tough to be a buyer. We had a family up in Wabash County. Their father worked for my grandfather for 40 years. They know the farm real estate market. And they wanted to put some money into farmland. They bought a piece in March of 2021, paid about $7,000 for it, pleased with the purchase. It wasn't a spectacular piece of land, but they got one done. They want to put some more money into farmland, and they're trying to buy it at $8,000, $9,000 an acre last fall. And I said, Dave, the market's changed. We got to be thinking 12. Well, you're kidding me. I said, no, I'm not. Look at these statistics. So that's the big change. The 20 average was 51. The 21 average was almost 71. So a big change in land market, and a whole host of reasons for that. Here's the other way to look at this is the $10,000 an acre mark. And this is something I got actually from R.D. Schrader, because these are some statistics he talked about at the Top Farmer Workshop for their sales. But if you look, the first 6 months of 21, 17% of our sales over 10,000. The last 6 months, 88%. That compares to less than 10 if you go to the previous 2 years. So big change. And then this just shows the big jump. This is last, 5-6 years. And it was a flat line if you draw a trend line through July. And then it's really been flat since, just at $20 per bushel. So it didn't, Pat said this the other day. He said, Howard, did we really jump from August? Did the price increase from August? Or did it just jump to that and then just stay there? And I think it's kind of done that to some degree, which would lead into what might happen this year. So here's a bar chart showing the same thing. Here are a number of sales. This goes back to March of last year, so about 10 months ago. And you can see that even in spite, this just shows that volatility that we talked about. 46, 47, which would be in theory below the market. 92 in Fayette County or Connorsville. This is all before the big jump. Here's Hamilton County for 15 with some development potential. We sold one in the same neck of the woods for 19 earlier this week. So then we got to July. See, not much happened June and July. That's pretty common. Summertime's a little quieter in the cropland market. And then we had these 4 sales in August that I talked about. So 14, 11, 10, and 10. 2 states, four different counties and 4 different locations, all northern Indiana or western Ohio. But outside of that, there wasn't any other consistency to it. Now I'm showing these, here's 4,300 for recreational land, but 15, almost 11. So here's a couple that Gary did. Here's the Purdue Beef Farm, 6,100. So you want to know what pastures, woods. This was a blended sale that had very little cropland in it out of the 882 acres. Cattle farm, which would be similar to what you might have down here in Putnam County in some locations. Here's 2 in the Wabash River floodplain. I know that could be an influencing factor when you get down in these parts. And the day that we sold these, and I don't know if Gary wants, I told this Tuesday night, the day that we sold them, Gary, how did they look?
Well, just say the river was pretty wide that day.
It looked wet. It's kind of bad when you have your 4x4 or 4x8 signs on the property and they're almost underwater, right? The day of the sale. That's not really an ideal marketing move. And you would think in September that wouldn't be an issue, right? Yeah, or October. But so if you have compromised land in the sense that it will flood on a regular basis, because those farms always have, that's kind of what values you might be looking at. All joking aside, you see some pretty big numbers
all the way through the fall, and we had a lot of sales here. Hamilton County, $102. That's development influence. That's the halo effect of Indianapolis. And residential development causing 1031 exchange, that kind of influence. Here's another one in Hamilton County, $29,000 an acre. You can say, well, that's going to have houses on it next year. No, it's zoned ag, no sewer and water. It is farmland and woods today. Group of guys not originally from this country bought it, and I don't know what they're going to do with it. We had one guy, a competing bidder, saying, at $23,000 an acre, I just want to hunt on it. So, I'd come to Putnam County and probably find you something cheaper than that. No offense to Putnam County, but that seems like a crazy amount. Now, this was by Purgatory Golf Course at Clare. If you know where the Strawtown flea market is, that's about where this property is. But still, that was, we thought 15,000 an acre would have been appropriate for that, and it brings 29. And then here are the sales. These are last week's auctions that we had. So the question would be, has this market continued into 22? And between these sales and the two that we did the last 2 days, the market would argue that yes, we've continued the trend. And why would it change? Commodity prices have not declined. In fact, they've increased a little bit this year. Interest rates still are relatively low. Farm Credit can speak more to that, but I think we're in a pretty good spot still. Here's what our estimate was back in September as to how the farmland market had changed. Now I show you this just to show you the diverse opinions, because I had some of our people say, oh, maybe on the best cropland only up a couple percent. Now this is early September. And then other people up 30%. So, but the other thing is woods, rural building sites, and recreation, all stronger. So it was not just cropland. Who are the buyers? Last year was about a 50-50 split for us. These are our actual sales. So when we go to an auction, the farmer is the person who's actually producing the crop. So when we call somebody a farmer, they're driving the tractor, they're doing the planting, they're taking the risk of growing that crop. The investor would be everybody else. So sometimes that's somebody like Series Partners, which is more of an investment fund, but most of the time that's somebody from Greencastle, doctor, attorney, business person that wants to own farmland as part of their investment portfolio. So about a 50-50 split. Normally that's a little higher toward the farm. Number of sales compared to previous years, you can see this had historically been less or the same, a low number, but we did see our staff felt like there was more in the market. Sure, there was. And then if you take dominant purchasers, and this is the question asked, dominant purchaser in your marketplace on all sales. The 50-50 split is our sales. This is all sales, which would include off-market transactions. And it's about 75-25 still. Purdue Ag Barometer, I'm not going to speak about this because Jim's going to do it here in a second. But that does influence farmland values, I think, or at least reflects where values trended, except for the last 6 months. So maybe you have some thoughts on why farmlands continue to go up with the barometer going down. Will inflation be a factor? Historically, farmland is very positively correlated to inflation. And no one will argue now that the data is in, we've been in an inflationary time for the last 12 to 18 months. And so this is kind of the prediction going forward into 22, 23, where farmland values might go depending on inflation levels. But the point would be, in all cases, it's a little stronger going forward. These are U.S. cropland values, so that's why they're not near what Indiana's would be. So farmland debt, we'll talk about this briefly. We are inflation adjusted. So taking inflation out of it, we're back to about the all-time high of farmland debt. You have a little bit more real estate debt, less non-real estate debt than what we had then. But you'd say, gosh, back to 1980, and we got the same amount of debt, inflation adjusted, that's kind of scary. Well, it would be, except our asset values are a lot higher, and interest rates. So average interest rates on non-farm real estate loans, you can see where it was up above 18% in 1980. Some of us weren't around in 1980, or in the farming business in 80. But I was on the back end of that, where I remember a couple of people on our staff lamenting the fact that their 12 or 15% CDs were rolling off, and they were going to have to take 10. We haven't seen CD rates like that in decades. But this low interest rate is really what's making up a phenomenal difference. And how is that? Here's the machinery debt service index. So this is estimated annual payments to service $1,000 worth of debt. See how high it was. It took $1,600 to service $1,000 worth of debt back in 1980, and it's taken less than 400 now. So why are we in less troubled times? So here's a great way to look at it. The blue is debt, and the orange or the red, brown is interest expense. So that's what you're writing a check for. And see, it was about equal back in 1980, but today, while debt is back where it was, the interest expense is dramatically less. Here's the debt to equity and debt to asset ratio. So I talked about asset values being higher than they were in 1980. And so when you're looking at asset values that are $9,000, $10,000 an acre versus 3 or 4 in 1980, then that total amount of debt will lead to a lower debt to asset equity ratio at a level that has been pretty survivable. Here's debt to income, and that would be your total debt divided by your farm income. It started to get above 5.5, which this was deemed the concerning. This is 1977, where it goes above 5, 5.5. That starts to be a warning sign. We got there in 2016, and had it continued to trend this way, that would have been a problem. We've been back to where we were then. But fortunately, farm incomes and debt didn't increase a lot, and interest rates stayed where they were. Here's the delinquent loans, less than 2.5%. There's still some out there, just not a high percentage by any means. This is an interesting, and Natasha Cox said Tuesday night that actually working capital as a percent of was about the same as it was a year ago, even though cash is up because the cost of production is up so high. I hadn't thought of that. That would be an influencing factor. But you see, we had really eroded working capital in the last 5-6 years due to the low market. And here is inflation adjusted real working capital, which again is concerning. So where do farmland values go from here? It depends on these 3 things: farm incomes, interest rates, and supply. We generated a lot of cash 07 to 13, kind of like last year. Had that cash drain. We just looked at that. Government support was absolutely critical. Interest rates still historically low, and farms for sale are less than the normal. So kind of bullish factors on all 3 points right now. Farm incomes, gosh, you had some gross incomes that were over $1,200 an acre. That's profitable. Probably some farmers made $500 an acre. When I started in 1988, we sold farms for $300 an acre. Sold them. They weren't great, but there were some prices like that. Rents, $450 an acre. So while incomes were really good last year, certainly production costs are up. So here's what the USDA is now saying in terms of net cash farm income and net farm income in general, $116 billion. The thing to look at that is you go back historically, that is at the higher end of the range. So it was a good year last year. USDA payments. So when you think about market facilitation payments, CFAP payments due to COVID, there was a lot of cash that came out over the last few years. And you look at the end of this chart, 2020, fiscal year 2020 was the highest ever. This is inflation adjusted, going all the way back in the 1980s. Here's the breakdown. Blue is net farm income, orange is direct payments. And you can see the breakdown there that was a pretty significant part of the overall income picture in 2020. Didn't show 21 because the payments were a lot less, and farm incomes were a lot better. If you take the government program payments out, incomes in 2020 were actually down. So when I say that was a pretty key part of support for ag, it was. And that's why when working capital got to that really low level, that a lot of farms were able to survive and continue on because of the support payments that we received. Are we going to get many in 2022? No. Prices wouldn't justify it. I don't think there's any programs that are going to get passed to provide it. Impact of trade. Briefly, China's purchases of soybeans dramatically back up after we got through the trade war. Corn, normally they don't like to import corn, but they have. And then we have the impact of fertilizer prices. And you guys all are aware of what that is. And then fertilizer as an expensive shared budget revenue. The interesting thing is it's not at the all-time high, in spite of the retail sticker price on that. And then impact of timber values. Todd was just saying, you had a timber appraisal on a property and it was $5,500 an acre, standing timber value. That doesn't include the real estate underneath it. Harvestable timber today. So with residential expansion and a stronger housing market, you would get timber values moving up. Here's the cap rate in farmland. And I had said for years that 3% just kind of felt like a minimum, but we're at about 2.5% today. So gosh, that's a really low rate of return. Well, farmland is compared to other fixed income assets, which would be CDs, treasuries, and what are those? So comparatively speaking, farmland is still at a positive by 100 plus basis points to those other fixed income assets. You don't compare farmland to equity stocks. Those are two different types of assets. But fixed income wise, farmland is still pretty competitive at 2.5%. The concern would be is if interest rates went up 300 basis points or 3 percentage points, then all of a sudden that flips. And CDs might be more appealing to an investor than farmland. Cash rent results, just briefly, will you increase rents? Our staff said back in September, yes, they would. That's not a surprise. A lot of rents for 2021 were negotiated in the fall of 20 before commodity prices had their full price appreciation later in the year. And so a bigger adjustment probably than you normally would have done due to higher fertilizer and input costs happened this fall to make up for some of the increase that didn't happen for 21. So there's demand for farms to rent and the market is moving stronger. Was the demand for farmland to rent for 22? And 7 of our people said more and 4 the same. It has historically been strong. I don't think there's been a time in my 30 plus years of doing this that we've ever struggled in the Midwest finding farm operators. The market changes, how much you're willing to pay changes, but generally speaking, there's always good demand. Do you have any tenants in distress? And one of our people said yes. And I just throw this out here. We did 2 receiverships last year. Receiverships are a situation where a court has been asked to appoint a receiver to kind of oversee an operation to help cover the lenders, protect the lenders. So I point that out to say it isn't rosy everywhere. It's a whole host of reasons why that occurs. But there is always some degree of distress due to certain circumstances. Flex lease, we do a lot of flex lease. I like this tool. It's a tool where the guaranteed rent is a little less than the fixed rent market. And then you might pay a bonus as a farmer, you might pay a bonus if it's a good income year. Not just yield, it's yield and price, it's revenue. And we get 25 or 33% for our landowner above a certain hurdle. And that tends to be a fair way to do leasing. So that hurdle might be as high as $900 an acre in corn and $650 on soybeans, based upon what my staff said back in the fall. That 900 is about $100 an acre higher than what it had been a year ago because of the higher input costs. So the farmer is going to get that first $900 an acre. That covers their variable costs, that covers machinery in theory, and it covers rent, fixed rent, the guaranteed part. And then anything over 900, they share with the landowner in some split, 25, 33% the landowner, something like that. So here's the Purdue Survey on cash rents. And this talks a little bit about what I was saying. Most of these rents were negotiated in the fall. And so they are at a point a little less than the all-time high, where farmland values were back at the all-time high. I think this will show a bigger increase in the survey done in June than what you might expect. Making up for it. So to kind of finish up, here are the reasons why I'm going to be bullish for the farmland values this year. I'm thinking probably another 3, 4, 5% increase on top of what we already saw last fall. You've got long-term world demand fundamentals for food. You see that impact almost immediately when day by day we track the rain in Argentina and Brazil. And that influences what corn and soybean prices are doing. So it's a just-in-time type of delivery. You know, this whole Supply chain issues are real for everybody, including food. Interest rates are still favorable, that 4.01%, that's an average fixed rate for 15-year money for farmland. That's the Federal Reserve, this is not Farm Credit. So these are the FDIC banks. And that's their average, and that is the lowest in recorded history by the Chicago Federal Reserve Bank. And it's been that for, I don't know, the last 8 quarters. Every time the letter comes out, this is the lowest ever, it says. And 4.01 was in October, the lowest reported. Supply of sales did pick up, but I don't think it's overburdensome by any means. Government support is going to be likely 0, but again, do we really need it? Is it justified? Probably not, unless you got into a disaster of some sort. And input costs are certainly rising, and there's more cash out there. So cropland values in an uptrend. I think there's going to be strength in timber recreational land. That's going to continue based upon the calls that we receive and the interest we receive. The average to below average farm would be the one to be concerned about. 80 acres and 5 fields. With today's equipment, that's kind of hard to farm. And so as a result, that might get discounted more versus the 80 acres in 1 field of the same soils. So where do we go from here? I'm bullish, as I said, for these reasons. And I just don't see a lot of that changing. The biofuels demand is remaining in place. World population growth, I think trade deals have helped, probably continue. Potential for inflation is a positive factor for farmland. Commodity prices are pretty good right now. I think if we go through February, which starts next week, that's your crop insurance price setting one of the 2 months if you choose the harvest option. But if we go through February at pretty high values, that provides the crop insurance alternative. You can lock in some pretty good coverage. And oh, by the way, you can sell. And I think Pro Farmer Rock are somewhere around 20% sold on 22 crop. So I'm not super aggressive on selling before it's in the ground, but you have the opportunity to lock in some profits today. So as a result, I think land values are going to continue to be higher. These would be the arguments on the other side. How could we get bearish? Why would land values go down? We saw a rapid appreciation. Could we lose 15 to 20% of that right off the top? You could, if a couple of things would happen. The Federal Reserve has talked about increasing interest rates. Do they do it a quarter point at a time, a couple of times, 3 times maybe this year? Or does it move up 200 to 300 basis points, 2 to 3%? I doubt that happens, but if you saw interest rates really rapidly go up because inflation remains super high, then that could be a problem. Combine that with Russia invades Ukraine. China does something with Taiwan. North Korea does something with, who knows? Those would be black swan events, would they not, Steve? Those are things you can't predict. They say, well, probably Russia goes into Ukraine over the weekend. I don't know, maybe. And that might actually have a positive influence on corn and wheat prices. But still, those are global situations we can't predict. We have no control over. But those could be your black swan things. If the RFS were to change, I don't think that's going to change a lot, but that could be a negative. So Steve and Jim can offer their opinions on that. I think the biggest thing is you got a high cost of production. And so if we saw a big decline in commodity prices for some global reason, Brazil and Argentina starts raining a lot the next couple of weeks, that could lead to lower commodity prices, low cost of production. Combine that with an interest rate increase that's more significant than what is thought, then it could be a little bearish. Otherwise, I think you're in a positive upward trend still. Questions? Comments? So this just documents what I said. Our survey said 2 to 15% back in September. We've seen a lot of that already, but still will be bullish going forward.
Okay, we'll get started again. I'm very pleased to introduce Gary Chapman. Gary is a partner at Bose McKinney & Evans in Minneapolis. He is a ag attorney. I don't know if you like that title or not, but estate planning. He's helped a ton of our clients over the years with 1031 exchanges, with planning their estate, with negotiating solar leases, with doing transfers of real estate and into a whole host of various things. And so he can answer a lot of questions you might have as a landowner. And I think you'll give some background on how you started. Okay, perfect. I won't go into that then. So he's a farm boy at heart, so he knows ag really well, as opposed to some other attorneys who have no experience in the space. So Gary's going to talk to you about solar leasing. It's something we do for 2 or 3 solar companies. He is not with a solar company. He doesn't represent a solar company. He represents you. He represents landowners in your negotiation with a solar company and representing your interest in making sure you get the best deal for your family or your farm. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gary to teach us about solar leasing and what we should look for. Gary?
Well, hello. Most of you, or many of you I've known, but again, I grew up on a dairy farm many, many years ago and actually went back home and farmed for about 6 years before going on to law school. So I was in production ag and you show the times of the 80s. Well, that's when I was in production ag. So I can remember borrowing money at 18% is what I borrowed money at when I got out of college and went right back to the home farm to my cows. I went into the dairy buyout program. I don't know if anybody who's a dairy farmer or anything like that, but in 1986, there was a buyout program. The government paid us to stop milking cows, and I took the check and went to law school, so it turned out okay for me. So, but anyway, tonight, most of the time I've talked in these groups about estate planning, succession planning, and taxes. And we're going to switch it up a little bit tonight and talk about solar leasing. We had a lot, we thought we had a lot to talk about in those areas, but we talked about it all last year, and that's all we did is talk. And when it came time to passing the bills, luckily nothing got passed, and so we're still at the same place we were a year ago. We'll need to, just a kind of a pre-warning, 2025, we're going to see a real reduction in the exemption, and so you're probably coasting between now and 25, but in 25, you may want to talk to your estate planning attorney and do some work in that year. So tonight, we're going to talk about solar leasing. We're going to have a couple of objectives tonight. Mainly, I'm just going to walk through these things that you're going to, if you get approached by a solar company that wants to lease your ground, what are the terms that are going to be in that lease, and what can we do to help make that a little better for the landowner. I want to leave time for questions. And one of the things that I'd like to emphasize up front is the sooner that you can get somebody like me involved in the negotiations, the better off you are. And the larger group that you can get, these solar farms will come in and they'll want to lease up around 1,000 to 1,500 acres contiguously. And if you know that somebody's knocking on your door asking, you need to talk to your neighbors and find out who else they're talking to. And then you get together with your neighbors and come talk to me, and then we'll talk to the solar company, because you have a lot more leverage that way if you're going as a group to talk to the solar companies. The terms, these are long-term leases. Most of them are going to start out with a term of 25 to 30 years with an extension term of the same length. So you're talking about a potential to tie your ground up for 50 to 60 years. So it makes sense to take a little time up front and make sure you get it right, because once you sign that lease, you're in a long-term relationship. And unfortunately about these is that the solar company doesn't take the same stance. The solar company will reserve the right in those leases to walk away at any time. If technology changes and suddenly solar panels aren't the cheapest way to make electricity, they reserve the right to cancel that lease and walk away. Now, you put provisions in the lease that allow to make sure that they're going to take away the panels and give you your farm back. But that's one of the things that you're locked up. If they exercise their option, you're locked up for 50, 60 years because they can walk away at any time. So when you're negotiating, you need to think in those terms and be aware of what the parameters are. Most of the leases will start out with they'll either start with an option, or they'll have a lease that you sign up for, but then they'll have a developer. Basically, it's a 2 to 5 year period where they're going to pay you a nominal fee to tie up your land so that they can see whether they can get a solar project approved for your area and move forward with it. And you'll get payments during that time of anywhere from $20 to $40 an acre for the farm, that land that they tied up. So that's the other things that will happen at that time when you're negotiating at that time of the lease is we'll talk about these as we get into it, but you'll want to, there's certain things that you'll want to put into the lease if you can get site plan approval and certain things we'll talk about at that portion of the lease. Then I said, the next area is the operational term, which is 25 to 35 years. It depends on the lease. Most all of them will have an option at least 1 year. One option to extend for the same length. Some will divide that down to the options in 5-year options, and maybe look at 5-year options, but you'll have various options. One thing that you'll look at is not only do they have the right to terminate the entire lease, they also have the right to terminate a part of the lease. So they may option your whole farm, a 500-acre block. But when they get ready to lease it, they may only select 200 acres. They may only select 150 acres of it. And so one of the things that I like to do when we negotiate these leases up front is I'll put minimum required acres in there that they have to take down. Usually I will shoot for at least 75%. It depends on your farm. If you've got some wooded acres and some ravines and some ditches, may not get a 75% in there, but at least. And so what I say is, okay, you can partially terminate as much as you want, but if you take any of it, you're at least going to pay me for 75% of the acres. So that if you commit to a solar option and you sign up with it, you're at least going to get a 75% of that solar rent payment. Because they'll show you up front that maybe the rent's going to be $1,000 an acre. And you're sitting there thinking, I got 500 acres, $1,000 an acre. That's a pretty big number. But when they get right down to it, they may only take 200. So I try to help facilitate that so that you can make sure that you get, if you're going to bite this off, you at least get a big hunk of what you think you're going to get. The other part of that is on these partial terminations. You don't want to have little parcels that they can't use that are landlocked that you can't get to that suddenly you get no rent for. So I'll put, and most of the standard leases don't come with these kind of provisions. You have to, they will put them in there if we ask for it, but they don't come off the shelf with that kind of provision. But I'll put provisions in that says, none of the parcels, if they don't take it, it has to be at least 15 acres, contiguous, farmable type of ground. So they cannot leave you with little bitty 20-foot strips on each side that they're not paying you lease payments for. If they're going to prevent you from using it for something else, they're going to pay you rent payments. Some of the lease options, and we'll get into that as we talk about the rent here too, but some of those will end up kind of two-tiering the rent, and they'll pay you one rent rate for where they're going to put solar panels, and then they'll pay you another rent for those inconvenient parcels that they can't put panels on, but you can't farm either. So some will do a two-tier rent structure. Like I said, the option term rents are usually 20 to 40 bucks an acre. Usually they'll ratchet up, the longer they go, maybe you'll get 20 bucks the first year, 20 bucks the second year, 30 bucks if they don't exercise it and it gets a little more expensive as it goes along. Yeah, you're farming during the option because they haven't done anything. You still have complete control of the ground. Reserve the right to farm. The next period of the lease will be the construction period of the lease. That gets when they actually come in, exercise their option, and then they're going to start that next term. It's interesting in the solar leases, in my mind, once they exercise the construction and you're not longer farming, if that rent is going to be $1,000 an acre, then you need to get $1,000 an acre. Few of the solar companies out there feel like they only have to pay you 50% or 75%, or they'll pay you something less during the construction period. And that's just what it is with those companies. And I've argued, and some of them will give in, but a lot of them won't. So some of the construction rent will be a little less than the full boat rent on the lease. One thing that they'll do in the construction rent is crop damage payments. It's a little bit different than in the wind leases. In the wind leases, they're not taking the whole farm. So there's going to be certain areas of the farm that they're going to damage some crops where they're putting in things. So we negotiate those crop damages and we get, provision. But solar lease, if they take your farm, they're pretty much going to take it all. And so the key that I focus on in damages on solar leases are adequate notice ahead of time so that you don't waste money putting crops in that they later come back and take. So I'll put provisions in that say if they give you notice, by February 1st, then obviously they're not going to pay crop damages. They may have to reimburse you for some fall tillage or some fall fertilizers, but they're not going to pay full-blown crop damages. If they don't tell you by, say, February 1st, and you put a crop in, they're going to give you X dollars an acre. They're going to pay you for what you would have harvested off that crop. So those are the types of things that you want to put in the lease to kind of protect that first year of the transition. So you get paid the full federal rent those years. The one thing that came out in talking about construction period that I've been doing this now, the solar leases probably for 2 years or 3 years. I've been kind of fairly popular and kicking in, but that wasn't until this last summer that I actually had leases going construction here in Indiana, where they were bringing in and starting the construction. One thing that happened that I don't think people are aware of when they sign up a solar lease is they brought in dozers when they started this construction, and they started leveling some of the ground, which meant they were ripping the topsoil off and then leveling the subsoil, and then going to sprinkle the topsoil back over that. And they thought that's just fine, it replaces your topsoil. Well, I stopped a couple projects because that's not what the lease allows. The lease does not give them the right to do that. And I can tell you now, I go in and put specific language in leases that say you are not moving topsoil without the landowner's knowledge, because what they, again, they say, well, this is a 40-year lease, it'll be fine when you get it back and all this. But once they move that topsoil off and mess with the subsoil and they compact and level it and put that topsoil back on there, you don't, if they terminate this lease next year and they give you this all back and they remove their solar panels, you're not going to grow 200 acre corn on that ground if they've done that. So they, the solar companies will argue with me and they say, oh, this is, they're never going to have this back. We're going to have it for 40 years. I said, okay, take away your right to terminate, guarantee me a stream of payments for 40 years at $1,000 an acre with an inflation factor, and I'll let you move my topsoil. They don't want to do that. So that's, and I think that's going to be a hot issue. I think there was a true misunderstanding between the landowners and the construction and the solar companies, because it's kind of like leasing. I say it's like leasing a house. When I put a lease together for a house, I don't put a clause in it that says you have to leave the roof on when you return it. It's just you just kind of assume that that's what's in there. So most of these solar leases did not have specific paragraphs that say you can't move the topsoil. They had paragraphs that said you can install solar panels. Well, the solar companies think, well, this is like any other commercial construction. I'm going to come in, I'm going to level ground, I'm going to, they don't think about restoring the soil back to where it was. All of the solar leases will have provisions in it that says when we return this back to you, we have to give it back to you in the same form we took it from you. But they can't do that if they've moved the topsoil. So those are the provisions I hang my hat on when I argue with them about what they can and can't do. I don't think we've seen the end of it. I think there's going to be some solar companies out there that, well, I know there are, because the ones I haven't stopped on the farms that I don't represent, they're just out there moving topsoil. So I know that's going to happen. So be careful of that and make sure you understand. And again, if they convince, if the facts are they have to do that to put in solar panels, okay, we'll negotiate that up front. You're going to know it up front, and you'll have to make sure that those economic provisions are sufficient to cover that risk that you're taking, that you might not get that far back and have 100 bushel corn acres instead of 200 bushel corn acres. So, but at least I want everybody going into it with their eyes open. Signing bonuses. First thing, they don't always put in, but most all the solar companies will pay your legal fees. Again, it's one of the things they don't offer up off the top. But if you say, hey, I want to have this reviewed by an attorney, most of them may put a cap on it or whatever, but ask them to pay your legal fees, because most of them will do so. Those that don't usually give you a large enough signing bonus that it covers those legal fees up front. So that they'll give you a $10,000, $20,000 signing bonus to sign up. They'll also put false dates in there as to when you have to sign up to get the signing bonuses. I've never had somebody that put a date in for a signing bonus that if we missed it by a week or 2 weeks or a month, that you didn't eventually get your signing bonus. Those are mostly
fictional dates to try to get things done in a hurry. Again, we talked about the operational rent and the construction period. I argue for 100%, you won't always get it, and sometimes it's anywhere from 50 to 60% during the construction period. The construction period for a solar farm is going to be 1 year to 18 months, probably. It's not going to be a little extended, but it's not, it will be almost a full year. And like I was talking about the grading of the topsoil, make sure you get a provision of that, at least get it to an understanding with the solar company. If they're not, I've had solar companies that since I've had this experience, I've gone to them and said, look, I want this topsoil provision in there. They've just said absolutely not. And it was in a situation where the client, this was a recreational kind of, the landowner was a absentee landowner that used this farm as a hunting, and there was more woods than there were farm ground, and so he was fine with that was something he was willing to give up. So the hunting was more important to him and this was going to pay for his hunting practice, his hobby, so that was fine. That's where we went.
Back in that prior slide.
Yeah.
You talked about tile damage.
Yes.
So what about our landowner to the north, not in the solar? An adjacent landowner who's not in the solar project, and there's a 6-inch main going through the project field, but I want to pattern tile my field, now I need a 10-inch main. To me, I feel like I've been damaged because I can no longer go across that solar field, plow a new tile.
Well, it's an
Does that make
interesting.
sense?
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying. Are you, if you didn't own both fields before, I'm not.
So one of them, so I chose not to be in the solar project.
Right.
That the option, chose not to. So the field I own, I want to pattern tile, probably sometime in the future. But now because the field like it's south of me, they are in the project. There's 100 acres standing in my way of solar panels that I can't run main. So I feel like, my tile is going bad.
Well, what I can't do is you don't really have, you don't have property rights on somebody else's land. You would have had to negotiate with that owner, put in that tile, even if there was no solar panels
There's
there.
various laws in Indiana that can't keep you from, before we had access to go through an
It's a good point. What I put in the tile damage language is that they're responsible for any damage on your tile and any drainage it affects around you. So I will put language in to do that. Now, I'm not sure you're going to get extended and get it covered what you're asking for, but clearly, if they do something that affects your drainage, if they do something putting in the solar panel that's going to, right, I see what you're saying. Right.
And then what all the adjacent landowners gonna do when the tile goes bad, they just say we're gonna maintain what it is. We need to upgrade to a bigger tile. To me, it's like putting in a landfill, they damage, they hurt the property values, they bring in.
I don't, that's a good question. I don't have an answer for this guy.
Kind of related question, but a little bit different. So what are, here in Indiana, there's a 75-foot easement either side of a regulated drain. So what do they do? What are they doing on regulated drains go through a field? And then are you going to get paid rent on that?
No.
They can't put.
No, if you have a regulated drain going through your field, they're not going to put solar panels over the easement. They can't do that. They won't do that.
And but then that's not really farmable,
Right. And so that's all in negotiations up front. You need to negotiate. I've dealt with that in situations, and in a couple of situations, I'm getting rent for the whole thing regardless, because it's not his, we can't farm it, we can't do anything with it. So it's inside the fence and you're gonna pay the rent for it.
Yeah.
But the solar company will try to argue, boom, it's outside, I can't, and that's in the solar companies that they'll have one rate they pay for where solar panels are and one rate they pay where they're not. Like maybe like a 800, 200 split or something like that. They would pay in those leases, they would pay you the lesser rate for that area that you can't get to, but they're still gonna pay you something. But yes, you can't build on
They can't build over power lines, they can't build over local drains. So if there is a drain in your situation, if there's a drain that's already going through that, it's a county drain, they can't build over that. Okay, it's private. So that same thing with, power, pipeline easements. If you've got pipeline easements going through your farm, they're not gonna be able to build over that easement. So you're gonna have a strip through the solar panels that are gonna be open. And that affects that 75% I've already told you about. Sometimes they'll come back and say, look, there's just only 60% of this is all we can use because of things like that. And so that may affect your decision then to sign up. So you need to kind of understand that ahead of time. But yeah, the drainage tile is something, I spent a lot of time in this in the wind agreements, because in the wind agreements, you're still farming that ground, and what they do when they put in those towers, there could be some compactions, some tile damage and some things. So I spent a lot of time about getting pretty comprehensive current, let's fix this now and have us control. A lot of times I will have the landowner control that, so that you get to pick your tile person and all that. In the solar, it's a little different because they've got control of the whole farm. They're gonna fence this thing in, and so if it is not, if it's not drained perfectly, it may not bother them. And so what you want in there is you want an obligation for them to repair it and return it to you at the end of the term. When they turn it back to you, you want the tile to be just like it was when you gave it to them. And so that I spend more time focusing on returning it back. Now, most of them will say they still want to repair it as they go, because they feel like they're going to want drainage under the solar panels. They don't want any water cooling or anything like that. So they're going to fix it as they go. But you cannot go into a pattern tile field and put a row of these posts down and not expect to hit a lot of tile. So there's a lot of tile repair that's going to happen. And so what I do is beef up the tile language. It has to be what aggregate backfill and stiff tile, and I forget what the exact terms are, but I beef that language up so that if they do repair it, they repair it properly. And you've got a tile that's going to work when you get it back. But but I'm more focused on what it's going to be like when you get it back than during. And the only thing, yeah.
You got a county ditch, they gotta maintain.
Excuse me?
If they have a county ditch, don't they have to maintain?
Well, yeah, the county ditch.
Bringing your neighbors.
Right. And the county ditches, they're not going to build over. They're going to have to keep those open.
They have tile blowouts and whatever, they need maintenance.
Right.
So,
Right. So the county will have access, and those will be maintained here.
what we're not on.
Excuse me?
It may not be on county maintenance. It's the owner's responsibility to maintain county.
And then those ditches, the drainage on the property that the solar companies lease is their responsibility. So it's their responsibility to maintain that. And I've got language in it. If anything that happens there that affects drainage on the neighbor, they're responsible to repair that or to fix that. So that happens, yes.
I would just.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so the dollar numbers, I've seen not too many below 800. A couple of years ago, they were starting around 800. I've seen them as high as 1,200 an acre. And most of them now are around $900 to $1,000 an acre. The key in operational rent is going to be your inflation factor, because most all of them will have a 2% inflation factor built in. They're going to up your rent 2% a year once the operational rent period starts. And 2 years ago, when we were starting these negotiations, they kept saying, well, you look at the last 10 years and we've never been outside that 2%. Well, this year we went to 7% in the last 6 months. So that doesn't work anymore for that argument. So I beat on them on the CPI. I want the greater of 2% or the increase in CPI. Yeah.
What happens if the government changes the formula like they did 30 years ago?
The language you reference is the CPI or similar. I mean, you put language in there that you have to replace it with a similar type of mechanism. They, in the wind agreements, I could get this, the CPI, most all the wind people were comfortable with the CPI. About half the solar people, and I don't know if it's how they negotiate their power sale agreements with the power companies, but about half the solar companies just flat out refuse to put a CPI index in there. And so, you know, you're gonna get it with some of them, but you're not gonna, I've got it probably about with 50%, I've got a CPI increase in there, but there's some that just will not put it in. The other factor that if I can get, I want is I want that appreciation starting today when you sign the lease. Most all the leases say, okay, once the operational period starts, you get the first anniversary of the operational period, you'll get a 2% hike in your rent. Well, if the development period is 5 years, you know, it may be 11 years or, you know, 6 years out before I get to any sort of appreciation. And if we have a 6-year period and inflation continues like it has this last 6 months, we're going to be way outdated when that rent starts before we even start. You know, you're going to be behind the 8 ball. So, and that's again, I beat on these guys a lot, and a few of them I've got it to where they will give me the appreciation starting from day one. And if they won't do that, then you just have to argue for a higher rent. I mean, because that's the only way you get around it. If you get a high enough rent from them and you factor in, okay, if they give me 800 and 1,000, you know, that works. I mean, you can get around it another way, but that's the one thing you need to do is work for it. Because that's, I mean, really in these leases, that's the big thing. Is what are you going to take your land out of production? I mean, what's going to be the
You get the CPI and it's pretty high. If 5 to 10 years down the road, they're not making any money on the solar farm, they'll just walk away.
That's right. But they also may come back to you and attempt to renegotiate. And at least at that point, you may not get the full CPI, but you'll get more than the 2%. They're not going to walk, they've got a tremendous amount of investment in this solar equipment, and they're not going to walk away easily. They may, I mean, it's a certain number. And that's what they'll tell you. They're going to tell you that, okay, I can afford to do that because it has something to do with their power agreement, because they are tied into a power agreement for long term. They think they have to keep their costs consistent with that. That's what they tell me. I don't know. But so it's amazing how some of them can do it and some of them can't. So I haven't figured that one out. So that's the nice thing about negotiating. When I've been with about 15 to 16 different companies, I'll have solar companies come and tell me, oh, we just don't do that. Solar companies don't do that. And I will say, well, this company, this company, this company, and this company does. So you can't tell me that it's not done, because it is done. Some of the solar companies will figure out how to do it. So, but that's the key thing. Getting that CPI increase, if you can get it, is to me is a big fact, particularly with what's happened last year. I mean, when you see that inflation, and when you see what's going on with farm rent prices. You know, 2 years ago, when you were comparing farm rent to $1,000 an acre, well, the solar lease looked pretty doggone good. Well, when you 40% increase in farmland in 6 months, if that continues for any period of time, you're going to, that $1,000 an acre may not be all that wonderful, you know, down the road. So you got to be. That's why I think it's important to get the CPI index in there somewhere. And then where it starts. Oh, and the other thing is late fees and interest. It blows my mind that these guys, really these leases are long-term financing. This is what they are. I mean, that's what they are. They're the way of them financing the real estate purchase over time to supply their land need. I bet you 90% of them, the first go around, they have no late payment or interest for late fee payments. I don't know how many farm credit loans you would give out there where you didn't put a late fee payment in for when somebody missed a payment. But you know, I'll ask for that too. And my experience with the wind leases up just north of here, up in White County, there's a lot of particularly when these are new projects and new experiences for the solar companies coming in, like it was the wind companies. There's a lot of kinks to iron out, and those wind payments didn't get paid exactly on time every time. And I had a couple farmers that were really tenacious about it, and they paid, we collected a lot of late payments out of those wind companies. And so it's so when they give me grief about asking for late payments, I say, well, if you're never late, it's not a big deal. You know, you're never gonna have to deal with that. So get late payments and get interest payments on your notes. And like I said, I can't tell you, I did 50 to 60% of the leases I see have no late payments in it for farmers. So you need to make sure you get that. The other things that if you gotta be careful about is they'll have language in these leases that grab easements over every other piece of land you own. They'll say, well, when you give me this lease, you're gonna grant me an easement over all land that you own. Well, first off, yeah, maybe we'll give you access easements if you need them, but you're gonna pay us for them. And so I incorporate payment structures for those leases, and I make it apply not to any land that I ever owned, but to land that I own today. Because I don't want you to, buy another farm 2 years down the road and it happens to be next to the solar farm, and now all of a sudden they've got all these easements over that farm, which they haven't paid you for. So I limit it to what I just want to make everybody know what they're doing. I mean, lay it out on a piece of paper, know what you're giving them, and make sure that the rights are being paid for if you're giving them those rights. Transmission lines, again, those were a little bit more negotiable with the wind companies and the solar, because with the solar, they're pretty much have control of the whole property. So whether they put overhead lines, it's not that big of a deal. But in the wind agreements, I would always take out the right to put in overhead transmission lines, because I want them to put them underground, just because it's less cumbersome to you guys as landowners. But also, overhead transmission line easements are a lot more expensive, and we can negotiate those on a one-off basis with the wind or solar companies later. Now, that's something on the solar farms I'm not as critical about, because for the most part, if they're on the property and they got a fence around it, I'm not as worried about what an overhead line would do. So I don't negotiate that much with it. What I do is on these easements that go outside of the farm and they go over other areas you have, they want to reserve the right for overhead easements. At least I put in there that the rate for any overhead line is going to be double what they pay for an underground line, just to get some incentive to put it underground if they can. Yeah.
So when you try to get a transmission line that goes underground, do you usually have a set depth that you like to have it that they cannot come above this depth?
Yeah, most of these, it's interesting, most of we'll put in all the leases at least a 36-inch depth, and a lot of them will be 48-inch depth. It's been interesting though on the removal language that we'll talk about in a little bit. Most of the time you put the removal, you want everything removed, and you want everything removed to at least 36 inches or 48 inches below ground, so they get all those wires out of there. I've got one solar company that will only remove it 24 inches because they say, look, if we go down 36, 48 inches, we're going to start ripping up all your tile. When they pull those lines out, they're not real discretionary how they do it. And so, I've had some where we kind of made it discretionary how they, whether the landowner wants that done or not, but yes, there's requirements in that they bury them at least 36 inches. I've never seen anything less than 36, if not 48 inches on the solar. The other area, most all solar leases now will have rights in it to have battery storage on the property. That is just going to be that's just a factor of the solar lease, because it's important for them to be able to store power locally before they send it into the transmission lines. And it doesn't mean that they're going to have battery storage everywhere, but if you're close to where they're hooking into the power line, they're going to need some battery storage there. The only reason I point that out is you just need to make sure that you've got some environmental protection language in there and stuff too, because batteries are a little bit different environmental risk than just a solar panel. So you've got to make sure you've got that covered, but that's going to be there. Substations, again, I usually carve those out, and so in the regular lease, I will take out any reference to substations, because if they want a substation, you want to negotiate that separately, and you don't want to grant them the right to have a substation in a lease where they're just paying you some nominal fee for it, you want to make sure that you get, because those, I mean, they pay dearly for the substations. If you happen to be the farm that's under the power line, they need your farm, and they will, you can negotiate a whole lot better terms on getting that substation than just the normal lease. So you want to necessarily you want to negotiate that separately. The other things that you'll see in there, though, most all these are assignment contracts, and then the solar companies want that, mainly because a lot of the people out there putting solar leases together may not be the company that's actually going to run solar. You've got a lot of companies out there that are gathering land and putting leases in place and packaging this all up and then selling it to the solar company developer. The key there, you just want to make sure that whoever they assign it to has some wherewithal to carry it out, because the scenario I don't want to get into is they get into trouble, they can't make their lease payments, they assign it to some shell entity that has no money, and then they go under. So you want to look at the assignability provisions and make sure that you've got some protections in there for if they sign. Insurance coverage, this is a 50 to 60 year lease, and most of these leases will have okay, you need a $2 million liability insurance coverage in here, and it'll start up front, but they'll never escalate that. Well, you need that liability protection today. $2 million is not the same as it's going to be 50 years from now. So I at least get in there that if when they extend the term, you'll double it, or you get some inflation factor in the insurance provision so that you've got adequate insurance coverage. Restoration requirements and removal security. I mean, again, the big risk that you take when you take on one of these projects is if they do go out of business, are they going to remove that solar field from your farm? And are you going to get the farm back and can you farm it? Most county ordinances and stuff will require a bond. And you'll see different language in the lease. I want to get language in the lease that kind of spells out what they're supposed to do. If the county requires them to do something as strong or better, that's great. But I want to make sure that I've got a fallback in the lease that they're required to do, because every county doesn't have an ordinance. And so you've got to make sure that you're covered. I want that security to be in place the day they start construction. What a lot of the solar companies will tell you, well, look, we're going to put millions of dollars worth of equipment out there, and if we just walk away, you've got all that equipment, and you can have somebody will pay you to come get that to take it off. Well, I don't think that's quite the case. I have one company that I finally had them share a decommissioning estimate with me, and it doesn't work that way, because once it's just like a used car. I mean, the minute that you drive it off the lot, that solar panel's off the lot, it's not worth anything like it was initially. And the salvage value of those, yes, it may be worth something, and yes, that will be a factor, but when you look at the numbers, I've not seen the salvage value of the equipment ever cover the total cost of the removal. So you make sure that you've got the ways for them estimating what those will. You get that security put in place day one, and then I always have it at least every 5 years, they redo that appraisal where you have some inflation factor on it or something, so that you've got adequate security, that you've got somebody that's going to have a wherewithal to get that stuff off the property if they do walk away. And again, the counties, most of the ordinances are pretty good when it gets down to it. They're the ones that have actually passed the ordinances. And so but again, I want it in my lease, and if it happens to be the county, and they don't have to provide it because they provide it to the county, that's great, but I want the greater whatever I put in there, what the county requires. Well, that's pretty much the lease. I'd like to open up to questions now.
Curious, on the previous slide, you had a bullet on property tax. And you said
Oh,
I missed it.
yeah, I didn't talk about that. One of the things, they will almost always pay for the increase in property tax, but one of the things that I've gotten in a lot of my leases is I just haven't paid the property tax, because I don't want to argue over what the increase, how much of the increase was attributable to the solar. And most companies will do that. Most companies, they don't want to do that either. And so what I'll do is once the operation starts, you're paying 100% of the property tax for that parcel. And the solar company, I'd say at least 50% of it will pick up that. If they don't pick up the property tax, they will pick up the increase.
And on a related note, how are most counties handling the property tax on a solar farm? I mean, are they taxing that as personal property?
Well,
On that?
yeah, the equipment will be personal property tax. So that's always going to be taxed to the solar company because you don't own that. But what you're worried about is then changing it from ag to commercial and upping your from a 2% to 3% or, upping that tax base is what and then the appraised value of your farm. I mean, if you've got a cash flow of $1,000 an acre, maybe that's going to appraise, and that I'd be interested in talking to Howard is people home is, what are these going to increase? How are we going to appraise these farms now that we put a 40-year lease with $1,000 an acre? So.
We're having comps here.
Go.
No, it should be some kind of discount as well.
Right. And that's what you guys have done a couple, I mean, there's wind agreements out there now, and you've done those, and it's just, you just do a discount.
Capitalized income.
Right.
At a discount rate that's going to be higher than what your farmland would be, because there's more risk.
Right.
For all the reasons you just started articulating. So probably a 5 or 6%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how many of your clients do you advise that put the farm in a separate LLC, just in case there's some environmental concerns that all of a sudden say, well, the solar panels had a carcinogen in it, the land is now toxic, and the bucket that came out so fast that the bond won't cover the damages to the farm. If you have it in your personal entity or estate, if the liability is great, you could have all your other assets at risk.
That's right.
It's real waste.
I haven't really focused on that because most of the people I'm working with already have it in especially an entity. But quite honestly, you don't want it in the same entity that your other farm ground is, because that's the biggest asset, and that's what you don't want to. So yeah, it probably makes sense to do that, to segregate this out and put it in a separate. It's interesting because a lot of the ones that I have done, they've been pretty much the entire. Yeah, they're all in. Everybody's in. So there's not a lot of land left outside that to protect. But you still would want to do that with your other assets. So.
Gary, can you give a mortgage on that property?
They're going to ask you to subordinate.
Exactly.
Yes.
So when should you get your lender involved?
Right away. They're going to want the lender involved right away because they're going to ask for subordination because they're going to finance their solar panels, and it's a leasehold mortgage type of leasehold, but they're very, very particular about the rights that those lenders get in those, and they want to make sure that they have a right to cure if you miss paying your farm credit mortgage, they want a right to pay it because they don't want farm credit coming in and taking their land from them because they're going to step in and cure that default. But yet they will ask for subordinations from all your mortgages.
Are there any farms that are now actually in production yet?
There are solar farms in production here in Indiana. The ones I've worked with, I know there's construction going on in a Rush County farm that I worked with. One EDP is working on one up here in White County. But I don't know that any of them are in production that I've worked on yet.
That's what I meant here in Indiana.
No, I'm not aware. I mean, there's some smaller farms. I mean, down at the airport, there's a solar farm. You can see when you drive in and out of the airport. Howard, have you been across any active solar? I mean, I know there's some smaller ones. I mean, like 60 acres, smaller farm. But as far as the big ones, I'm not.
We did a couple. I had a client that sold land, leased it down in Texas, and there's a couple 10,000 acre
Right.
projects down there. I don't think those are quite in production yet either. When I was down there last in September, they were still putting panels on them. But yeah, it's the commercial development, the Mammoth project up in Pulaski and Stark County just started construction in the last few months. So that'll be a little while before
Right.
that's done.
The EDP project over in Randolph County, is there anybody who, that one I think is done. I think that's up and running.
You've got a lot of the school projects that are 5-6 acres done. There's a lot of smaller ones that are,
Yeah.
but the large scale commercial, I don't think.
I think the Randolph County EDP one's probably a 5,000 to 1,000 acre project in it, and I think it's up and running. I did not work on that one. I didn't work on those leases, but I mean, it's interesting because there's going to be a lot of solar panels in Indiana. Because I know the IBJ did an article on it not too long ago, and they listed 20-some projects in the state. I worked on 30, and none of the 20 they listed were the ones I worked on. So I mean, there are a ton of projects going in the state in the next year or two. So there's going to be a lot of solar.
If you just look at the coal-fired plants that are closing,
Right.
the electrical generation is coming.
It's different. 5-6 years ago, you had some of these smaller, the power companies were required to do so much green stuff. And so they had to do these little 50-acre solar farms or whatever. So you had a lot of solar companies coming around trying to tie up a bunch of ground in leases. And then they would take this package to the company and they would pick one out of 25 different, 80-acre parcels to put a solar farm on. That's not what's going on now. I mean, those weren't economical. Those were just green things to make the solar, they were checking the box type of thing. These power grids and what the solar farms are doing, they're producing electricity at a cheaper cost than what the coal is now. So it's finally become where there's enough innovation in the solar panels, and they've got the cost down to where they can do it more economically than they can do the coal. So it's something that's coming.
How many of the transmission lines that were laid for windmills still have enough juice on them or enough open capacity to be able to take solar power?
I don't know the answer to that. I do know that some of the solar contracts I've put in place are in the middle of the windmills. It's the same company that does the windmills, and they're now contracting with the farmers to put solar panels. And it's interesting because you talk about stripe type of, you're still going to have some farmable ground because there's certain easements along those wind turbines that they are not going to be able to put solar panels next to. And so it's going to kind of stripe up the farm quite a bit. So there's still going to be some ground. But I don't know what those are. And I don't understand the mechanics of when they bring a new solar project online and they hook up, there's a lot of dynamics going into what has to happen to upgrade that line to make it accept so that they can accept power. And the cost of that upgrade has a lot to do with what the solar company then can pay the farmer. And so I've had, if it's really, really expensive, then sometimes they'll just postpone the project because they won't wait till something else comes along to upgrade the power line. But that's an issue, is the cost of upgrading the power line to take the power.
And here I would mention to people that they will buy your land. So that is an option. And I had this client down in Texas, it's 3,800 acres. He got 2 times the money what he had in it.
Wow.
And did very well. He just said, I don't want to lease it. I will sell it, but I'm not going to lease it.
And they will. And a lot of times they don't start out with that because to get the total acres they need,
Tremendous amount of capital.
well, and also it's not feasible. Farmers are much more likely to lease the ground, and you can get an 80 here and 100 here from 3 or 4 different people to lease than just outright buy. I think they've struggled with the just outright buy side. Once you get a high enough price in those rental, you wonder why they don't buy, because you do the math.
Economically, it was a better deal for him to rent it,
Yeah.
but he wanted to sell.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Anybody ever talked about unintended consequences
That's what I think about. You drive over to White County, there's 200 red lights, blinking,
Right.
legs swoosh, and I don't know all the details about it. I just wonder if there's any unintended consequences that we haven't thought about.
One of the unintended consequences on the solar farms were the topsoil issue. I mean, I hadn't thought about that until it happened, so I don't know. But a couple of the guys that I have putting in the White County farm, they actually, they went down and looked at an existing solar field down in North Carolina, talked to the landowners, talked to them about what happened and how the company was working, what they would like to work with and all that before they ever agreed to sign the lease with them. But yeah.
One of the unintended consequences, a lot of reclamation bonds, oil, gas, coal, paid off. Well, so surety companies actually foreclosed. So that's an unintended.
Right.
So I would make sure the financial stability of the surety.
Yeah.
Hard enough to get the TV.
Yeah. Right.
What about a field solar?
Solar
panels?
panels.
40 years from now, we don't know what the viewpoint of those things.
Yes, ma'am.
Kind of two questions, Gary. One, I don't think we talked about, is what about what surrounds it? Like, I know a fence is typically going to be there, but I've heard some of them plant trees, and then dovetailing with that, do you negotiate anything as far as maintaining the grass or whatever is underneath the solar panels, or does that come into the negotiation?
I put language in about noxious weed control, all that kind of stuff. And I also put language in that says they can't use soil sterilants that last for more than a year. Because again, I don't want them sterilizing soil that you eventually are going to get back. It's interesting, we've done some real creative things because there is the more progressive folks out there are talking about using this land and raising ag production on it and potatoes and different, I mean, there's some things you can grow underneath these panels. Also, I've got some farmers that will contract for the maintenance rights so that they get to do the mowing and some of that and will have the right at least to bid on that. And a seed company that contracted that they were going to supply all the seed for the clover or whatever got planted. And sheep grazing, there are sheep that graze, they use to maintain these, and there are people that have retained the right to do that. So you as a farmer retain the right to own those sheep and maintain the property for them and have your sheep graze on the ground. So that's what's fun. I don't know how practical some of that stuff is, but I've got those provisions in some of the solar leases. And
Yeah, to your
solar
point
companies
about, fences, natural fences, planting trees, mounds, they will do that around residents. They're not gonna do it around woods or a road, because nobody spend money. But around residents, they'll do that sometimes. Setbacks, I had NextEra tell me they like 100 feet from property line, 350 feet from a wall. Setbacks.
and those are going to vary by county.
That was the solar company's recommendation. And that's where a county would put in a affordable setback, which eliminates
Right.
all commercial solar development in Indiana. If it's affordable setback.
Because a lot of that, county up in north Fort Wayne, were fighting over setbacks, and the setbacks that they wanted to put in the county pretty much it made the solar fields almost impractical because you couldn't set back that far and still have enough ground to put in your solar panels. Yes.
Does having solar panels affect
Affect your what?
cropping?
Well, I mean, I think that's gonna be two separate things. You're not gonna be growing, I mean, if you still are farming on other ground, you're gonna have the same cost of crop insurance there. You just won't, you're not gonna enter those acres that have solar panels on them and for crop insurance.
Yeah, to your point though, I think your APH.
Right.
You'll have 10 years of no production, so you'll have a county average. If you start producing 4 years out.
Solar panels right next to it.
Oh. Yeah, I don't know that the solar panels have an impact on the front property. And the planting of trees, they're not a real big fan of that because it's shade.
No.
Shade is not.
I mean, there's height restrictions within so many feet of the solar panels, and so you're gonna, so if you've got plans to put up a grain facility somewhere, you wanna make sure you accept out of that ground around it so that you don't get stuck with prohibitions against certain heights of equipment. Yeah.
Through your discussions, and negotiations, have they been forthcoming in how often they'll replace these over 25 years? Because the technology is changing at such a rate. I read the once in a while back how what they put up 20 years ago didn't last 20 years because of new technology.
Right. They haven't, I have not got involved in that question at all. So,
Over 25 years.
right. There's language. They allude to that in some places because on the replacement bond, they will argue that if they replenish, that lowers they don't have to renew the replacement bond as often because thinking obviously that they're newer equipment and obviously worth. I don't put much weight on that. I still want an independent appraisal of what it's worth every 5 years and, to meet that renewal. But they obviously are thinking of that because they think if they're coming in and replacing, they've got a big investment. And therefore, the salvage value would be higher.
And someone mentioned disposal. There's all kinds of issues. Disposal of these things because of some of the chemicals.
Right. I've seen that a lot of the counties will have the decommissioning plans that spell out exactly how all that has to happen. And there's one of the solar companies that has just kind of adopted a kind of generic decommissioning plan that we put as part of the lease, which I kind of like because at least it covers the bases and puts some basic information in about what they're doing. So.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate it. We're gonna rotate on over to Natasha.
All right, everybody. First, let's thank Howard and Gary. Tremendous information tonight. Thank you, Alderman, for having us here. To participate with you. I know we ought to look to you for advice and a resource and a trusted partner in the ag real estate market and the ag industry in general. So I think Indiana is pretty fortunate to have Howard on here supporting us all. So let's give you one more round of applause. With Mr. Chapman, who I've known since I think I was 12 years old, right, Gary? We've been doing this together for a little while, and we appreciate the insight. But let's all just agree too that these type of conversations about renewable energies and things are not going to go away, right? Whether it's solar, wind, other conversations that we're going to be having. There are people working in their basement today to disrupt what we are doing. It could be positive or negative disruptions. And we know that the world will continue to change and the velocity of change is increasing. right? All the time. Think about it. Did our big blockbuster stores see Netflix coming? Hulu, Disney Plus? I can't even keep up with all the streaming devices that my children want to have today. I don't even know how to use them all. I consider myself exceptionally techy, or at least I did yesterday compared to today. Okay. Did the hotel business see DVRO coming? Absolutely not. Did taxis see Uber coming? Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. So in the next 20 minutes, we're going to talk about change, the velocity of change, what's coming up in the next farm bill, not what I think is going to be in it, not necessarily what will be in it, but what are some factors that could impact that over time. I'm Natasha Cox. I'm a regional vice president of ag lending with Farm Credit in America. I've spent 20 years almost with the system since I was 12. I reside on a family farm in Benton County, Indiana, where we live with 3 assassins every single day. So none of this stuff Howard talked about scared me or got me excited. I live with 3 young children right now. I'm just teasing. I am proud to work for Farm Credit in America alongside of the individuals that are here with me today. Kyle Harvey out of our Crawfordsville office. Kyle, you can stand up. Matt Leahy from our Lafayette office. Cottingham, who's my boss. He's a member of the board of directors at Farm Credit in America, lives in Williamsport, Indiana area. We have Renee Reinhardt, DRO, out of our Valparaiso, Indiana office, and Melissa Harvey, who is an FO out of our Kokomo market. This is just a few of our team members that get to serve our 18,000 customers, member owners of our cooperative in the state of Indiana. We have almost $6 billion of debt here in Indiana and $32 billion of debt. Now, after Howard showed the price of farmland, that $31 billion doesn't take a lot to get there these days, does it, Howard? It's a lot of money that we deal with today. We're going to talk about that. Farm Credit provides loans, leases, and risk management strategies to farmers and ranchers all across the U.S., not just here in the 4-state territory, but Farm Credit in America does get to serve Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee. What I'm not going to talk to you today is about balance sheet fundamentals, the importance of doing your taxes right, accruals, and AEGs. Can we agree that that would really be a lame subject after these 2? Howard, they run me out of the place completely. Maybe. What's also nice about working with Howard is he does a really good job about covering the economy and the financial markets. Can we all agree with that? I think we all walked away with a little better knowledge of what we think the interest rate markets are going to do, land values, cap rates, and all that for visiting with Howard Haldeman today. Farm Credit in America insures about 2.53 million acres of crop insurance, association-wide, almost 1 million acres here in Indiana, and we have 15% of that. It's not important for you other than the reasons that insurance is important. It's one of the 12 titles in the Farm Bill, right? Most of the time when we go out and we survey producers, they say, what's one of the most important things to us? Risk management tools on our farms. The ability to manage risk. How many of you would like to have an input facilitation program right now versus a market facilitation program? Right, that's on one hand. Thank you for entertaining me on that. I thought that was a very clever idea. No one would take me up on it though, right? But that's the reality. We don't have a revenue problem today. We maybe don't have a margin problem today. If we look at where markets are at, as Howard alluded to, if we take those opportunities to manage risk and understand how to leverage the assets that we have, whether we're a landowner or we're a farmer as well. These are a few of the USDA programs that you're looking at just this year alone. It's important to have trusted partners like Alderman's, Gary Chapman, the Farm Credit Support by your side to help you think about these. Pandemic Cover Crop Program, WIP programs, PACE, and then of course the 2023 Farm Bill. How many of you are familiar with the top 3? Kind of, right? Scott, thanks for being honest. Ty, thanks for being honest. Kind of, right? There's a lot that you have to facilitate for your head and your businesses every single day. In 2021, how many of you would say that we were somewhat of a gridlock in Washington? All right? I mean, I'm not going to get into politics here today. I'm just going to say we were somewhat of a gridlock. If you look at the numbers in Congress, we're a country somewhat, we're a country divided. We looked at the 2021 from an agricultural perspective. We introduced things like the infrastructure investment bill, permanent SNAP benefits, because what is the largest portion of the farm bill? What's the largest title? Nutrition, right? So that falls under agriculture, right? That big thing that happened there, that falls under the spending, the baseline spending for the Farm Bill. Biden pledges funding hunger to fight global hunger. When we look at the United Nations, that also fell under an agricultural act. In 2021, there were 224 agricultural policy bills introduced. Probably didn't make the mainstream media, did it? Okay, 224. There were only 3 of those enacted. Only 3 of those enacted in 2021. Here's some things for you to keep an eye on 2021, 2022 as it pertains to agricultural policy bills. One of the ones that you probably know the most about or hear the most about here in Indiana is the Growing Climate Solutions Act. Okay, so we hear that. We have also Senator Braun's bill, those things like that, but 224 bills that had a sponsor or didn't have a co-sponsor that are still sitting out there, 2021 in agriculture. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. So what does that mean to you? What's going to be important to you as you lobby? You need to lobby for what's important to your farm and your business and those that you represent in agribusinesses in 2023 as we look to enact the next farm bill. Howard talked about interest rates and the Fed funds expectations. How many of you have ever heard of Roger Bannister? The Bannister effect. Okay. The importance of 3 minutes and 49 seconds. In 1950s, Roger Bannister was a medical student. He ran the first sub-4-minute mile in history. Prior to that, there have been people holding sundials for decades and centuries trying to figure out how to do that. How long did it take for Roger Bannister's 4-minute mile, sub-4-minute mile to be broken?
It was like a month or something.
Not long.
7 weeks. 7 weeks. Velocity of change. What changed during that time period? Perspective, right? Perspective. So what is going to be your perspective as we head into this next production year? What is going to be your perspective? What's something that is a stretch goal for your operation that you haven't done before, or risk management strategy that you haven't thought about that you're going to put on your plate? What is that mindset that you're going to be changing? What mindset are you going to have around interest rates? Are you highly dependent upon debt? Is debt something that you use? And that's okay, I'm a lender, so I'm okay with that. Is the debt something that you use in your operation? As you can see, and Howard talks about it, the market is pricing in for this year 3 interest rate rises. You can see what Bloomberg's done. We can also see what the GS baseline has done as well. Federal Reserve is meeting right now, Jerome Powell. We're gonna hear some announcements on that tomorrow, give some indications of when we think those interest rate hikes will start. Remember, just a few short months ago, we were looking out into 2023, right? The discussion was the first rates hikes are gonna see. Now we continue to see inflation rise, and things are pacing along a little more aggressively than we thought. So we're starting to think about building down that balance sheet, increasing interest rate rises. Here's where we can see what the 10-year treasury is done. Does anybody know in February of 2020, what the yield on the 10-year treasury bond was? What was the low point of that? Less than 0.5%. About 40 basis points. Anybody know where we're at today? 180. 180. Okay. So our interest rates on the rise. We're still at record lows. We've seen inflation hit 30-year highs in October. We've seen that again, 6.2%. We've seen the Fed's hold the federal fund rate at 0 to 0.25%. And we know that the treasuries are well over 85 basis points higher than they were even just this time last year. Okay. What does that mean to your farming operation? How much farmland in Iowa is leveraged? 20%, Howard said, right? So maybe to you in this room, this doesn't mean a lot, but maybe it means a lot to investments, your overall portfolio, and those that you rent land to as well. Farmland interest rates, you can see here, it's trended steadily downward since 2019. We can all walk, most of us have lived through these different eras, the golden ages. We walked in, we've seen some declines, in commodity markets through those times of higher interest rates as well, and then we proceeded to progress downward. We also know that in 2020, as Howard talked about, that a third of the US farm income came from government payments. How many government payments do we expect to get in 2022? Ryan, you said 0, right? Yeah, I agree. More than likely. What we don't know is what's going to happen with some of the things that we've discussed here earlier today. Russia, Ukraine, China, Taiwan. What are those global events that could still make us the best house on the bad block or the worst house on a bad block, right? And it's very situational, depending on what happens and escalates with our military and around the world. US farm expenses rose, when we look at it, 12.5% from a fertilizer perspective last year. We're expecting 53, or Purdue is expecting a 53% increase this year on your farm for your 2022 crop. You guys felt that? Has anybody felt an increase in input cost? Absolutely, but we also see that gross revenues have risen, and we'll talk a little bit about that liquidity ratio that Howard mentioned earlier, that we've expected that to rise, but actually hasn't rose as much as you thought, because as a percentage of gross revenues, it's stayed fairly flat in 2021, okay? So we'll hit on that. US farm debt, short-term debt declined, long-term debt stayed flat. Makes sense, right? Made money on the farm, got some contribution margin that you can tuck back in liquidity, or to pay down debt, or to buy assets with cash. Basic balance sheet fundamentals. Makes sense. You're not making much on it. If you're putting it in a CD or anything like that, so I'm going to take it, I'm going to use that, pay down debt, lever my operation in a different way. How would you show this slide? Great minds think alike, right? We should have checked that out. We should have, but I think this is a very interesting slide that answers some key questions when we think about the balance sheet fundamentals today compared to the 80s even. One, fixed rate financing. Two, the amount of non-real estate debt compared to real estate debt that's out there, and the values of the assets that we're dealing with, or much less levered than we were during those periods. Right now, working capital in the US to gross farm revenues is sitting at about 18%, okay? So it actually stayed flat compared to last year. The reason is because gross farm revenues went up, so there's an expectation that you're actually holding more liquidity, right? It's also costing you more to put that crop out. So from a lender's perspective, we're gonna have a little higher expectations also for your liquidity. So the 2023 Farm Bill, how many of you even want to start thinking about that? How many of you think it'll get thought about this year? You hear a lot of chuckles, right? That's a big if, right? If we can get it on the docket this year to be discussed, and that the reality of it is that it's important. It was a baseline bill when we wrote this. It was not a revolutionary bill. It wasn't something that was monumental, but there were some key things that happened out of that bill that helped us. Some things like ARC, PLC, some other facilitation programs that were beneficial to our farm. We increased loan limits. That was important, maybe not to as many of you in this room, but to young and beginning farmers. So there were some key things that, especially under the credit title, that were done in the 2018 Farm Bill. Batter up. Does everybody know who these folks are on the screen today? And you're way over here. Chairman David Scott from Georgia leads the House Ag Committee. House Ranking Member Glenn Thompson, the House Ranking Member of the Ag Committee. Senate Chairwoman Debbie Stabenow leads the Senate Ag Committee. And John Bozeman is the Ranking Member of the Senate Ag Committee. Think about the commodities that are grown in these areas. Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Arkansas. That look like Indiana to you? Illinois? We also have something called midterm elections coming up as well. So these faces can change by the time we begin to negotiate the Farm Bill that will impact not only you sitting in this room, but maybe the generation that's coming after yours back at the farm today. So it's important that you not understand not only who is in charge today, but that we're going to have midterm elections while we're trying to negotiate a new Farm Bill. A new Farm Bill that the OMB is probably not gonna want to score and give us more money for, right? How many of you in this room think that this is gonna be a bill where we have additional monies handed over to agriculture, the titles other than nutrition? We hope to hang on to crop insurance, right? We just hope to hang on to crop insurance. 99% of the spending bill is allocated nutrition, crop insurance, commodity, and conservation. Do we think there will be a new title in 2023? Do we think there'll be a 13th title added to the Farm Bill? Climate. How many of the spending bills going through Congress today have language tied to climate or renewable energy? Do you think that it might make its way into the Farm Bill? So if we have a baseline bill, what does that mean for you? The pie didn't get bigger. We might just have to look at it differently. And we also better be ready to come to the table with things that are things that we're ready to stand on the hill for. And if you're Howard, that's crop insurance, right? Maybe somebody else, it's the credit title. Understand what's important to you. So we surveyed Indiana farmers along with Indiana Farm Bureau over the last 6 months, trying to get some ideas for our congressmen and women and senators in our 4-state territory about what's important to farmers and ranchers in Indiana for the next Farm Bill. So most of you said, and it wasn't, I don't know that it was any of you in this room, but of those that we surveyed, they said most of the resources that you're looking at for the Farm Bill, 63% comes from media and news outlets. And then you fall into folks like Farm Bureau, other farmers, extension staffs, commodities, cooperative staffs, and others. Howard, we should have just put you on there by yourself, though. Okay. Engagement and the impact. Farmers in Indiana said this. They said this. So remember, my job today is not to ask you what you want exactly. It's to encourage you to think about this is a big deal coming up. And there's a lot of disruption around you and a lot of change. Producers said that over 93% of you said, I'm willing to support those lobbying on my behalf. Okay, it's important to me. When you look at that, 85% of you said, I'm willing to get up and actually get involved with my legislators and discuss the next Farm Bill. Time's coming, right? There's going to be an opportunity to do that. But general farmer sentiment, I didn't take this survey, but general farmer sentiment towards the state of the country was negative. Nearly 2/3 of those are not satisfied with how things are going. And we asked just about the current status of the country. It wasn't politically affiliated, just talked about the current status of the country. This survey was done by, administered by a third party for us, like I said, on behalf of lobbying for all of you for the next Farm Bill. It is very consistent with the ag barometer with the Center for Commercial Agriculture at Purdue itself. Many producers feel that the country's on the wrong track regarding ag regulations that include increased regulations on your farm, loss of the family farms, tax policies, succession planning. 40% of those voted that as their #1 priority. Lack of consumer understanding, so transparency in the conversation were all the top big 3 that came up. Although regulatory concerns were the #1 priority that was there of saying why we were heading in the wrong direction, most farmers in Indiana cited that input costs and taxes were their #1 concern on their farm today. Do you guys agree, disagree? Pesticides and water regulations are the most burdensome federal regulatory actions to farmers. And we listed things like farm labor, air quality, transportation, among those things. Thinking about the next Farm Bill, who you're working with, what you're lobbying for. We heard from farmers that said that pesticides and water quality and the regulations around those and the temperament today are very tough on your farm and worrisome for the next generation of agriculture. So the Farm Bill, what do you want to see in it? What does that look like? What does it mean to you? How important is it to you today, to your farm? For 2020, it was really important. Right? It was worth about 30% of your net income. Okay. So overall, farmers in Indiana gave give the 2018 Farm Bill, 37% give it a B score, another 46% give it a C on the report card. When we look at it, it said the increased amount of paperwork but it just didn't help my farm. When we looked at that, over 80% of farmers said that about the Farm Bill. However, many of you said that the new programs help. You like the way that ARC and PLC was able to be orchestrated, like the Olympic averages, the steps up that were in there. Most of you are participating in on average 1.7 farm bill programs. 1.7 your farm. The largest NRCS, EQUIP, are the two major ones, and then conservation stewardship are the major programs that you're participating in. Crop insurance and trade were key issues and topics that were top of mind in this survey. So most important farm bill topics that you said that Indiana farmers said they did not want to go away in the next farm bill. Trade, the ability to help trade or facilitate trade, and crop insurance. Now, something that was important to note is 22% said that nutrition, they'd like to see nutrition eliminated for the Farm Bill, not nutrition eliminated or decoupled from the Farm Bill. And what we know in the rural and urban areas that it would be almost impossible to pass a Farm Bill if we did not have nutrition in the Farm Bill there. But that was still noted in there, and not like we said, for the intentions of not taking care of others in needs, but really just decoupling nutrition from priorities on the farm and trade. But that's, what does this mean to Indiana agriculture? Biggest threats to agriculture, lack of consumer understanding of farm practices. I always say I'll raise what the consumer wants, right? And really, agriculture tends to do that and adapt. Top farming operation concerns, input costs, taxes, commodity market volatility, regulation, succession planning, labor, and topics, as we said, to eliminate from the Farm Bill, were there listed on it. Crop insurance listed lowest. So right now, today, when you poll Indiana farmers through this survey, they said that crop insurance is the #1 priority to keep strong risk management tools in the 2023 Farm Bill. Fewer farmers would like to see allocated funds to go towards rural broadband. I think that's a conversation we've been having for a lot of years, right? A lot of money thrown at that at the state and the federal level. We continue to, when we look at the velocity of change, our need to adopt Internet of Things on the farms and connectivities, we're still living in dead spaces. Actually, I can hardly get connected in here today with my 5G service just sitting in here, okay? That's an issue on our farms, and we know that with the technology advancements that we have. So things for you to ponder as you walk away today is that things are really good right now, right? We came off some incredible years in agriculture, and we also know that we've been afforded the luxury of some incredible interest rates for those of you that have been in the debt market. So think about stress test your operation. What if interest rates went up 1%? What would that mean to you? What would that mean to your return on your land? What would that mean to your operating? What would that look like? What would that look to your interest expense as a percent of your cost of doing business? Understand your inputs, where they're coming from, the third-party risk alongside of that. And most of all, the important conversation we're all having is can we actually get access to the physical commodity, right? Most of us, or many of you in this room, have prepaid most of your expenses for 2022. Some of you have actually taken physical delivery of those commodities, right? You don't have to raise your hand. I know that some of you have. Are any of you concerned about taking physical delivery of any products? Okay. Or getting it when you need it, maybe, just in time on your farming operation. Look for opportunities. There's an opportunity to price in profits. We also have record high cost on the farm, tied with record high revenues today. Okay, that may not be here tomorrow. We talked about issues with China, Russia, Ukraine, Taiwan, inflation, recession, interest rate increases, all those type of things. We're not here to tell you what to do. We're just telling you to ask you the questions of what are you doing today to mitigate risk in your business, and who are you partnering with to help you make those decisions or to provide you valuable input. Will we see continued global resurgence of COVID? How will that impact our ports, our waterways, our supply chains, and our labor workforce? And not only in agriculture, but for the goods and supplies that we depend on. Watch the midterm elections. See how that's going to impact who gets into key power positions for helping to negotiate the 2023 Farm Bill. It's going to be important. We just showed you who's in charge today. They don't come from any of the big I states, and that's okay. They're great representatives of the agriculture industry, extremely passionate about it. But most of them don't represent hogs, corn, soybeans, and wheat. Okay, just understand that. And then we'll continue to keep our eye out, lobby for you, take your feedback, and be a voice for you here in the Farm Credit System from 2023 Farm Bill. So I want to thank you all for listening today and coming. We know that we're a little past time. Howard, would you like me to turn it back over to you to finish up the day? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. We appreciate it. You're valued partners to all of us. Let us know if there's anything that we can do for you. Safe travels home.